Now, the Hunt Palmer Show.
A magic beyond anything you could ever imagine.
You are now listening to the Hunt Palmer Show. Brought to you by Sagrera Farms on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge. Locking down the middle of the day.
You really think that's the best idea?
Live from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio, this is Hunt Palmer.
It's quite a piece of work.
Welcome in. Hunt Palmer coming to you from Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio downtown in the capital city on this Thursday. It means we're brought to you by Sagrera Farms Premium Beef. Got Jacob Beck and Cassie Spazzali back there on the ones and twos, working towards the weekend. Kind of starts tonight. Got some baseball, actually a lot of baseball action in the SEC, but one we're specifically keyed in on. It'll be LSU and South Carolina. Very, very interesting series for a number of reasons. We'll talk about that throughout the show today. 15 minutes from now, we'll talk to Luke Johnson about the Saints schedule that was released last night. Joe Healy will be along in 30 minutes. I can't wait for that conversation because the amount of possibilities in the Southeastern Conference over the next 3 days is not infinite, but it seems infinite. There's so much that can go on, so many series that are so crucial to so many teams for so many reasons. We'll get into a lot of that with Joe at 1:30. Chris Blair, voice of the Tigers, will join us coming up at 2:15. Koki Riley at 2. No, Koki Riley's tomorrow. And I just texted him to confirm. We're doing that tomorrow. So I got to text him and go, we're going to call it, because I'm talking to Chris from Columbia today, Koki tomorrow. We'll get that straightened out. That's what happens. You try to rush a text message as your intro's playing. You might do it on the wrong day, which is what I just did.
Yeah, you should probably just avoid texting, like, at that
right
time.
At that point. Well, yeah. I thought I was giving him a heads up, and then it turns out I was giving him a 25-hour heads up instead of a 1 hour heads up.
And you got to be careful with Chris Blair, because a couple of weeks ago when you were out and Taylor was filling in, I called him on Wednesday, and he just answered because he told me he doesn't know what day it is of the week. So
yeah.
you have to
especially
make sure.
When sometimes there's Thursday series, sometimes Friday series.
You got to specify.
I'll be completely honest. This is probably not the case for most people with their jobs today. I feel like it's Friday. Because,
I do too, actually.
Because LSU plays tonight, and it just feels like Friday. So I don't know. But it's not. It's Thursday. So we're brought to you by Sagrera Farms Premium Beef. And we'll start today the way we start every single day with our Genesis opening drive.
It's time for Hunt's Opening Drive, presented by Genesis of Baton Rouge.
All right, LSU and South Carolina tonight from Columbia. We have laid out all week kind of the stakes for the weekend. I am comfortable, if not confident, in telling you that 2 out of 3 will be enough for LSU to secure a national seed. In saying that, I'm well aware that there are a lot of variables here, and we'll get into all that certainly on tomorrow's show. And then on Monday, I'll kind of give you how I really feel moving into conference tournament week. But it feels like LSU needs to get 2 this weekend. And it feels like LSU should get 2 this weekend. Let's talk about LSU's pitching plans for the weekend first, and we'll talk more about South Carolina later. Yesterday, Jay Johnson announced that he's going to TBA today, which he's already made that decision and let Paul Mainieri know. We don't know it yet, but we know that that's happened. And then tomorrow, Cade Anderson will go on normal rest, and then Saturday, Anthony Ianson will go on normal rest. And I said on Monday that's what I would do this week. There are a number of reasons for that. One, full rest. Cade Anderson was removed from his start due to wrist discomfort on Friday of last week. I don't need to force that issue. Anthony Ianson has thrown a ton of pitches. They've been great pitches, but he's thrown a ton of them over the last 2 weeks, so let's get him on full rest. That's one piece of it. Number 2, South Carolina does not have an arm that you have to match up against. You need to throw Cade Anderson on Thursday night in Norman, Oklahoma against the Sooners. Why? Because Kython Witherspoon is pitching in that game, and if you want to win that game, you need to hold Oklahoma down. And Cade Anderson threw a complete game shutout in doing so. But that had to happen if you were planning on being competitive in that game. And that happens a lot in the SEC when you're facing a true ace. South Carolina does not have one. So you don't have to match up. The other piece to this is psychological. And this may be just me. I don't know if Jay Johnson considered this at all. My guess is probably not, but it's how I feel, so I'll communicate that to you. If LSU wins tonight, then you've got Cade Anderson and Anthony Ianson the next 2 days, and you need a split. That's a pretty good spot to be in. If LSU loses tonight, then you've got Cade Anderson tomorrow, and that's a pretty good spot to be in. And if you can win that one, you got Anthony Ianson going to win the series and get that top 8 seed sewn up, and that's a pretty good spot to be in. So all of this makes so much sense on so many levels. The question becomes now, not are you going to do this? It's who are you going to pitch in the game tonight? I wrote a preview story on LouisianaSports.net. I gave you 3 names on LouisianaSports.net. Jaden Newt is one of them. Connor Ware is a second. And Zach Cowan is a third. Jaden Newt has gotten LSU off to some pretty good starts in midweek play. He's thrown up to upwards of 60 pitches. He generally throws a lot of strikes, and I think is a fine option to get LSU 9 outs tonight, if that's what they want to do. Connor Ware had such a great start against Dallas Baptist. The line score was good. The stuff was good. If you watched it that night in Globe Life, like, he really looked good, and then that never really showed back up from a starting perspective. But he's thrown it okay in some spot work in the last 3 weeks. They called on him to get Laviolette out in College Station in the last game, and he made a pretty good pitch, and he got a swinging bunt. But it was a hit. But I think Ware's fine. If you want to go with him, I think that's okay for 9, 10 outs. And Zach Cowan's very interesting. I simply would not do that. I feel like he would give you a great chance to get off to a really good start through 5 innings. But then you've burned him. Now, you have to add to that part of the discussion that Kason Evans is not slated to start a game this weekend. So if you're wildly concerned with burning Cowan, you could still have Kason Evans to close for Anderson or close for Ianson or close tonight when Cowan exits. You could do that. All of those I'm not wildly opposed to. Like, there are only a couple of names that I would be just vehemently opposed to. Like, I don't want to start William Schmidt in this game. That's a big spot for a young guy who's never done it and has had some issues with command. I have infinitely high hopes for William Schmidt as a member of the program. This is probably not the spot that I want to toss him into. The one name I didn't bring up, and it was probably a mistake on my part, and I should have written this at LouisianaSports.net, and I will say it now on the show. Chase Shores is a viable option. Now, LSU played on Sunday, and he pitched on Sunday, and that's only 3 days rest, but it wasn't as if he was overextended. So I don't know how they think he'll respond to that or how they feel about it. That is certainly an option, and if they decide to start Chase Shores in this game and feel like he can give them 60 pitches, I think that's perfectly fine too. There are very few options, as I just mentioned, that shouldn't work out against South Carolina. And who you throw first doesn't dictate how you have to manage the back half of the game tonight. Like, if you throw Cowan, for example, you feel like 5 innings is a real possibility. Throw Shores 4 or 5 innings is a real possibility. If you throw Newt, you're probably not getting 5 innings. But at some point, somebody's going to have to come out of the game, and you can decide who you want to go to in those high leverage or low leverage spots as they present themselves. Clearly, the ideal path here is that you start someone like Ware or Newt, who gets you off to a really good start. The offense does what Auburn and Florida did to South Carolina, and all of a sudden you look up in the 5th inning and it's 8-1, and you feel like you can mix and match and get Rizzi in there and get Primo in there, and maybe you can get through this game without using Cowan, without using Evans, without using Ianson, without using Anderson, and you've got Friday and Saturday loaded for bear. But you can't mess around. If you get a chance to win the game, I'm going to need Zach Cowan in the game or Kason Evans in the game, especially if it's tight. It's going to be a feel thing for Jay Johnson. I don't know that there's a significant matchup thing at play here. I don't know that there's a defined path to get through this thing. It's just a matchup that you're more talented than them no matter who you throw out there. Your offense should show up in numbers and produce and score 8 or 9 runs in this game because everybody else is on South Carolina. And you just play it accordingly. Now, the final piece of this is what would I do from a pitching perspective? I would start Jaden Newt tonight. I don't think throwing a third-year college player, I know he hasn't pitched a lot, but he's a third-year college player out there who throws a ton of strikes, against a team that doesn't have a lot of pop in its lineup. And keep in mind that Newt has been extended a little bit to 40, 50, 60 pitches. And I would throw Jaden Newt out there with the hopes, I probably wouldn't tell him this, but with the hopes, okay, is there any way that you can get me through 3 innings pretty clean? 3 innings, 1 run. And at that point, you can reassess. If you feel at that point you've got a lead and you feel really good about the way that Chase Shores is throwing the ball to the bullpen, you want to go there, great. And then Shores can get you to one of the high leverage arms if you need it, or if you break the game open, you can go to some of the lesser arms. If Newt throws and it kind of blows up on you, then you use some of the lesser arms. And you keep everything full speed ahead for Friday and Saturday. There's not a lot of evidence to suggest Newt's going to blow up on you. If he doesn't blow up against Northwestern State or Nichols or Southeastern, I don't think he's going to blow up against South Carolina without Ethan Petrie. It's certainly possible. LSU knocked Gage Wood all over the place this past weekend. And from a stuff perspective, Wood's sensational. Some guys just don't have it. But I think Newt is a relatively safe play with a little bit of upside. And you're not really pushing a lot of chips toward the middle of the table if Newt's the guy you start. So that's what I would do. I think some of those midweek starts have kind of groomed him for this. I feel like there's a reasonable chance Jay Johnson does it. Would I be stunned to see Zach Cowan and Chase Shores in this game to start? No, I wouldn't be stunned. But we'll see. It's the first time Jay's done this year. Cade Anderson started every single one of the game ones this year. Anthony Ianson has started every single one of the game twos this year. So it's going to be different, and we'll just have to see what that inclination is that Jay Johnson has got on this Thursday. We're working towards it. 6 o'clock first pitch from out in Columbia. That's Central Time here, 6 o'clock. So if you want to listen to it, you can on Eagle 98.1, our sister station. Pregame fires up at 5:30. It'll be Chris Blair and Bill Franquez on the call. We're brought to you by Sagrera Farms Premium Beef, some of the best beef in the world, just north of Baton Rouge. Be telling about it all day long. But it's phenomenal, phenomenal stuff. My guy Sean Sagrera is fanatical about what he's doing. And if you're looking to get your freezer during grilling season, it's time to get in the backyard, fire up that pit, and get to work on the fillets, ribeyes, strips, on your hamburgers, anything that you want from a beef perspective. Sagrera Farms has got you covered. And I just invite you to call Sean, 719-1723. That's 719-1723. Again, we'll be talking about Sagrera Farms all day today and the incredible things that they're doing just north of Baton Rouge. But wanted to get Sean's number right out of the gate here. If you're interested in some of the finest beef literally in the world, 719-1723. That is Sean Sagrera's number up at Sagrera Farms. Luke Johnson talking schedule next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge, genesisofbatonrouge.com is that website. Every car that's on the lot is online at genesisofbatonrouge.com. If you're thinking maybe it's time to get in a new vehicle before we hit the road as a family for the summer vacation, whether you're heading to the beach or somewhere else, and you're thinking it's probably time to get some new wheels before we do that, put Genesis on your list. I promise you will be more than impressed when you walk onto the lot, you meet with their team, you see the facility, and you get behind the wheel and experience their entire line. From the sedan all the way up to the SUV, from the entry level to the highest end. It's all just phenomenal stuff. When I say Genesis of Baton Rouge, you should think luxury vehicle, because that's what it is. When I say luxury vehicle, don't just turn it off and go, can't afford that. You won't know until you look. And the Genesis model is a luxury vehicle at a reasonable price. It's Genesis of Baton Rouge. They're at Airline at Pico, where you can start that buying process today online at genesisofbatonrouge.com, genesisofbatonrouge.com.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Sagrera Farms.
Working towards the weekend. Hunt Palmer Show, 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge. Appreciate you hanging out with us. Joe Healy talking SEC baseball 15 minutes from right now. Yesterday, schedule reveal day in the NFL. All the teams have their 17-game slate set in stone. And one guy that's going to be getting to bed at a reasonable hour every single weekend this coming fall as Luke Johnson covers the Saints for The Advocate, joins us on Thursdays. Luke, no primetime games. Are you stunned?
No. I'm the only thing that was surprising is that they have as much in the afternoon slot, which I just kind of figured I was going to be covering a season where they had like 14 noon games, you know, which is kind of what last year was. It was like nothing but noon games with like 2 primetime games mixed in. So, but no, not even remotely surprised that they don't have any primetime games because they're like not a fascinating team right now. I think maybe they got a little bit more interesting after Derek Carr retired. You know, they're probably going to be starting a rookie quarterback, but I think that happened way too late in the game for anybody in the network to really care about it.
And I don't know if they really want to put that on TV anyway, unless it's, you know, the first overall pick. A second rounder is probably not going to move the needle a ton. I mean, usually on this day, we start talking about how you match up here and what about this short week and can you bounce back there? And like, oh, there's the 3 road games in a row. And like, does any of that matter for this Saints team?
I don't think so. Yeah, I kind of felt a little bad last week when we were on our podcast and you know, somebody's asked me what the best case scenario was. I'm like, is there one? Does it really matter? I mean, I don't think it necessarily does. The fact is that Vegas put their over under, you know, point spread totals out for all 18 games for all 32 NFL teams, and the Saints are favored in 1 game. Yeah, I think they're going to be a little bit better than that. I think they're going to be better than a 1-win team, but you know, I don't think the way the schedule plays out really necessarily matters for this team.
I don't either. But I would say this, kind of to juxtapose it against a different point, is that it's a team that needs some young players to step up, and you'd probably rather do that against a schedule that's not the most brutal in the league. And when I look at the schedule, I realize it's the NFL, everybody's good, and you can't really account for injuries, but it's a fairly forgiving schedule. They have some spot. It doesn't look that difficult, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Do you find it that way?
I think it's a little bit harder. Look, it's a last place schedule, right? Like
yes.
They're going to face teams that struggled last year. I think they're like the total win percentage of the teams on their schedule from last year's teams, like it was like 42%, something like that. But like I think the 49ers are going to be better. I think the Cardinals have potential to be good. I think the Bears have potential to be a lot better with Ben Johnson. You know, I think the division got better. Like there's a lot of things that. Like it's not like a super difficult schedule when you're looking at it just like face value, but I think it's more difficult than it's like a normal 4th place schedule would be.
And then the question, I guess, maybe the biggest thing that you would look for here is there like last year the front was so loaded, and if you say they signed a veteran quarterback, you might want to stick him out there for the first month and then go to the rookie when things lighten up. Talking about last year's schedule. This year, do you feel like it's probably just send Tyler Shough out there at 26-year-old and let him sink or swim?
I mean, as long as he shows he's that guy in training camp, yeah. Yeah, I don't know what you're going to really get out of if you think he's the guy. I don't know what you're going to get out of putting Spencer Rattler out there just to throw Shough in later. And I think, especially because you're looking at this as the team, I don't think is necessarily completely locked into Tyler Shough next year, right? Like if he goes out there and he's like doesn't show a bunch of promise, like there's nothing preventing you from taking an early draft pick next season. So I don't see the point in like delaying his arrival if he's the guy you think is the starter.
This is a ridiculous question to ask in May, but I'm prone to those, as you well know at this point. How do you think the Superdome is going to react to this season?
You know, I actually think that at least early on, which is like weirdly when most of their home games are, I mean, I think there's going to be some optimism, at least like maybe not optimism like, yeah, we're going to be a good team this year, but like optimism like, hey, it's something new and different, and it's like the 2 guys that were hated most by the fan base are gone, Dennis Allen and Derek Carr. It's a chance to see what Kellen Moore can do. It's a chance to see what a rookie quarterback can do, maybe. And I think there's going to be at least some excitement to see what it looks like. Who knows how long that lasts? You know, if it's a disaster early, maybe we're back to people showing up to the dome with bags in their heads this year. I don't know. But I think there's at least a chance for this to be early on, like some good atmospheres in the Superdome, some good vibes in the Superdome, and we'll see if it holds up over the course of the year.
Because I'll paint this picture. Like week 1, you've got Arizona, who, I don't think is going to be a great team. Like they could be better than they were last year. Like Kyler Murray's fine, whatever. Like I don't think they're going to be great. And then you've got San Francisco, who could be very good, obviously. But then your third and fourth home games are the Giants and the Patriots, who were terrible last year. And then you go to the end of the season when maybe Shook's starting to find a little bit of traction and got people who have put the playoff hopes potentially away, and you're just trying to see if there's some development in a quarterback. And you play the Panthers and the Jets, who I don't think are going to be very good. So, like, there's a potential for some early season decent vibes with some lesser teams, and then late in the season, maybe as the pressure cooker goes away, you could see some decent performances to kind of push this team into what we hope to be an exciting and encouraging offseason next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the hope, right? And I said that we just got done recording a podcast, and I said this on our show today that, like, I don't think anybody should be going into this with expectations that they're going to be like a competitive, potential like playoff dark horse team. I think that'd be unrealistic and unreasonable to take all these things that we don't know about Kellen Moore as a head coach, Tyler Shuck as a quarterback, what this Brandon Staley defense is going to, and assume all of it's going to look good. But, well, I think you should go into the season with low expectations. I think there's a chance that they outpace those expectations, and that Tyler Shuck is ready to be a good quarterback as a rookie, and that Kellen Moore is ready to be an NFL head coach, and that Brandon Staley is still that dude as a defensive play caller. So, like, early growing pains, I would totally expect it, but like I think that to your point, like by the end of the season, like it could look good, and it could give you some kind of optimism for what this could be later on. As this team kind of grows together.
We'll see. This is another ridiculous question, but you got a thought on a win total potentially as now that you kind of looked at it on paper and what the schedule will actually look like week to week?
Yeah, so we just did this exercise today, and I picked them at 6 wins, which I feel like is probably on like the high end of where I would like if I'm just picking like a win-loss total at this stage of the year. It's probably on the high end, but like I feel like somewhere between 4 and 6, right? And with like optimism that they could potentially supersede that. We'll see. There's just, like I said, so much like potential variance with this team. But if like Kellen Moore is the goods, and if Tyler Shuck is okay, and if they stay healthy, if it could look a lot better. I just don't think you should be expecting that.
That might be the sweet. I haven't even thought about this, but now that you say it, my brain starts spinning. If they were to win 6 games, that would indicate that, because they don't have more talent than 6 of the teams they're going to play. And if they do that, the quarterback's got to function, and the coach probably does a decent job, and you're probably got a pretty good pick in next year's draft. And like that, I mean, it's if you win 2 games, that's hard to like bring a ton of optimism out of. And even though you would pick high in the draft, and I don't expect them to win 10 games. I think that's unreasonable. So like 6, that might be like a sweet spot of like, okay, that was a transition year. It wasn't a lot of fun, but like there's some optimism there. Yeah. I think you could talk me into like a 5 or 6 win season with some good points that you can build on. And there's going to be a room for this team to really legitimately add to the roster in the next 2 seasons. So just like whatever the records are this year, to quote Mickey Loomis, we'll look beyond the record this year, and just focus on like, did you show me some signs of growth, something you can build around? Did you hit on this draft class? Are there good young players on this roster? I think there are more good young players on this roster than there have been in a while, but like they're unproven. So just show me that there's something there with these guys, and that this coaching staff has what it takes to lead a successful NFL franchise. Even if that results in a 5 or 6 win season, that's okay, because at least gives me a little bit of optimism for the future. You mentioned y'all just recorded a podcast. Let everybody know where they can find that.
Yeah, you can find it on all of your podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, and we also do we stream it on YouTube. So that should post about 3:00 today at saints@nola.com.
Awesome. We appreciate the time, Luke. Thanks, man.
My pleasure, man. Talk to you later.
He is Luke Johnson, covering the black and gold. Looking at the schedule, and I wasn't going to do 2 segments on the Saints schedule today, because I think that it may merit that if they were coming off an NFC Championship berth. They've got a first-time head coach and a rookie quarterback, so I'm not going to do that. But like, I can see a world where you start to maybe turn a corner after the bye, and you've got a week 15 at home against the Panthers, week 16 at home against the Jets, and then week 17 at the Titans. Like, those three teams figure not to be very good. And maybe that's kind of where you start to see some positivity moving towards the future. And I think if the Saints go 6-11 and 3 of those wins come in the last 4 weeks, and you start to see Shook, look like a guy that can maybe help, and Kellen Moore looks representative of a coach that has got some things figured out and is moving things in the right direction, and you got 6 wins, so you're probably picking in the top 6 of the draft, and you may be able to add a big-time piece right there, and then all of a sudden a lot of money starts getting freed up with Derek Carr being gone, and all of a sudden, like, you may start to push off the dock here. You're very firmly, like, tethered to the dock right now. There's a path here, and it's optimistic, I think, to find a way off. And so we'll see if the Saints can do that moving forward. If you're looking for our Saints content, you can always find it Hunt on Saints, wherever you find your podcast, and certainly on YouTube. I love telling you about Sagrera Farms premium beef. My guy Sean Sagrera is awesome. He is fanatical, and he has got something very, very special going on up in Ethel, 30 miles away from here. It is some of the top beef in the world. I'm not exaggerating, and it's not a guess. It's proven fact. They had a vet come out a couple of weeks ago to do some ultrasounds on their calves. I told you this last week and the week before, but if you talk about the scores for beef, and you talk about select beef, which is under 4% intramuscular fat content. You look at choice beef, which is 4 to 8. You look at prime beef, which is 9. Prime beef is the good stuff. You all know you've had a good steak. Prime, that's the good stuff, 9% or more. They've got cows walking around Sagrera Farms right now that are 12, 14, 17% on the intramuscular fat percent. I mean, it's ridiculous how good this stuff is. If that sounds like something you'd like to have at your house on the ready, in the freezer, Sagrera Farms is where you need to go. Give my guy, Sean Sagrera, a call at 719-1723. 719-1723. Prime Angus beef. It's Sagrera Farms. They bring you our Thursday shows each and every week. We'll come back with Joe Healy from D1 Baseball next.
The Hunt Palmer Show. This is the Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Sagrera Farms.
SEC baseball firing up tonight all across the Southeast. Everybody in action Thursday, Friday, Saturday in preparation for the conference tournament starting up next week in Hoover. Joe Healy will be all over it with his team at SEC Extra, part of the D1 baseball crew, and Joe's with us every single Thursday. We got a lot to talk about, Joe. How are you?
Doing well. Last weekend of the season is always a little bit of a weird one because it's such a quick turnaround to Hoover, and try to take in as much as I can this weekend, but it's hard not to look ahead, not just for the teams, but for guys like me.
Yeah, I don't even want to go back to last week, quite frankly. It was a huge win for LSU against Arkansas, but we've rehashed that, and now it's time to kind of look forward. And I talked about this earlier in the week. It appears to me now likely that the SEC gets 6 national seeds. That's never happened, and a lot of people push back and go, they're never going to do that. But it's hard for me to pry away from that. How do you feel about the conference getting 6 of the 8?
Yeah, I think it's totally on the table. I think that was shown last week when, on the D1 Baseball podcast, the guys do where they put the field of 64 together, and they ended up shoving 6 teams into the top 8. And I don't think they wanted to do it either, frankly, because there just is a little hesitation of if that'll actually come to pass. But when you get right down to it, it just kind of, they happen to be the 6 of the 8 best resumes, and that's really ultimately all that ends up mattering. And so I think it's totally on the table. I mean, of course that can change, but if you made me put a field together now, just Joe's, field, I think I'd probably have 6 as well.
Who should be a little bit more concerned? LSU, who's on the back end of the RPI on that, or some of the teams that have less conference wins?
Normally I think I would say, you're always smart to follow the RPI, but I don't know, like talking to J.R. Teagues, the committee chair, he was on the D1 Baseball podcast the other day, and he's kind of coming across like a guy who understands that the RPI is part of it, but doesn't come off as overly enamored with the RPI. they're understanding that there's a lot of different metrics they're going to pull in, understanding there's, just a lot of information out there. And so I think this sounds like a year where, especially this year where it's weird, where the top 3 RPI teams, I think are actually lesser teams than Arkansas, LSU, Texas, that group of teams. I think I'd be more nervous if I were a little bit short on the conference win side of things.
Let's talk about those teams then. Auburn has played really good baseball really all year. They've been swept twice, but they've played a lot of really good baseball and certainly dominated South Carolina last week. They're headed to Oxford. What do they need to do?
Yeah, it feels like they're in a really advantageous situation where, I think the combination of the quality of their wins, yes, they've been swept twice, but that also means that, they've won a lot of series, and they've obviously have a lot of quality wins. So I think they're in a really good spot as far as that goes. I think certainly if they get a series win, they're in really good shape. I think they're on the board if they just get one. Oxford's been a tough place to play this year. It always is. That's not new, but this year it's been particularly a fortress for Ole Miss. So I'm never going to bet on a series win there, but if they get it, I would lock Auburn in as a top 8.
Really nice weekend for Vanderbilt in Knoxville. They've got one more series to go here. What do you think Vanderbilt's odds of getting a top 8 are, and what is their strength?
Their strength really, I'll answer the second part first. Their strength is this is not new, but their pitching staff, but it's different. It's not rocker lighter that's just going to blow you away with fastball and all kinds of stuff, and they don't have the number 1 overall pick, that type of high-end talent, but they're leaning on guys that aren't necessarily big time stuff, but have great metrics. Guys that have fastball movement, guys that use their changeups differently, and then the depth. I mean, their bullpen might be the deepest bullpen in the SEC, and again, it gets overlooked other than Sawyer Hawks maybe because it doesn't have a guy coming out throwing 100 miles an hour necessarily. It's just built a little differently. So that is their strength. And then they're kind of in a similar situation here where, I think if they win the series, they're in really good shape. If they don't, it's a different story. And I kind of have a weird feeling about Kentucky in this spot. I could be wrong, but I really liked the way Kentucky played last weekend against Oklahoma. And I think Kentucky probably feels like, hey, let's get off of 13 wins because we feel pretty good, but you just never know. So look, I think similar to Auburn, you win a series and we're probably not even having a conversation on Selection Monday about it.
Texas is leaking oil a little bit. At 20 wins, I don't think it's going to matter. I think they're in, even if they lose their last 3 series. Oklahoma just trying to maybe get one win to assure themselves that they're in. But these are 2 teams that have postseason aspirations. Oklahoma just because of Kyson Witherspoon, I think. How do you see that series going in Norman with the way Texas is playing?
Yeah, that's Texas is a weird one, and I compared it on my Weekend Waypoint show this morning to like the golfer that finishes 4 under and is in the clubhouse, and but kind of bogeyed a couple holes late, and so the guy coming in behind him, he ends up wins by 2 strokes instead of 4. Like they just built up such a strong resume so early on that I'm with you that even if they look awful this weekend, lose a 3rd straight series, I don't think there's anything keeping them out of a top 8. And look, if they take care of business, they win a series here, like that's probably your number 1 overall seed if I had to guess. And Oklahoma, they're in the same spot as Kentucky, where it's like, hey, if you can get a win to feel good about not having to be nervous, the committee's going to suddenly draw a hard line on 13-win SEC teams, that'll make you feel a little better. And you're right. Like just the fact that they have Kyson, if they get the right regional draw, even as a 2, and they can hold Kyson for a winner's bracket game, like that's going to be one of your tougher 2s.
I saw a projection that had Oklahoma opposite LSU, where they would meet potentially in a super, and I had Jonathan Gray flashbacks from 2013 with Kyson Witherspoon sitting there waiting. So we'll see if that materializes. I listened to the D1 Baseball Preview podcast yesterday, and Runes put an incredible stat forward. I think it was him that said that Tennessee and Arkansas are playing this weekend. They've won combined 2 of their last 9 series, which seems almost impossible, being that I watched those 2 teams with my own eyes in Baton Rouge. I can't imagine that that's actually true, but it is. How do you see that one in Fayetteville?
Yeah, that's it kind of feels like a flip a coin. Man, I like on form. I like Arkansas better right now than I do Tennessee. I mean, how could you not? Because with Arkansas, it's like they've gotten outplayed a couple of weekends. But Tennessee's issues, I think, are more structural. Like, they're just not a good defensive team. They make a lot of kind of careless errors. They can't stop base running. They give away some free bases. So I just don't like that form. Now, I will say the bigger trend here, this season kind of reminds me of a big league season where, in the SEC at least, where a bad team can sweep a good team, and then nobody necessarily thinks that, that means this bad team must be good now. You just move on with the season and say, it'll all wash out. Most of the time in college baseball, it's a small enough sample that we really read into series results. But this year just kind of feels like, with the exception of Mizzou and South Carolina, any of the other 14, you kind of flip a coin and you go with that because that's how close it is. And we just understand that next weekend we're just going to flip that coin again 7 times.
This one's wild because I recall our conversation when Florida started 1-11, and I said, you can't possibly believe in them just if they sweep Mizzou. And you're like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then all of a sudden we look up and Florida's 13-14, and they're hosting Alabama. Can they host a regional?
I think they can if they sweep it. I mean, their RPI is good enough. I looked this morning; it was like RPI 13 or something. If they sweep that thing, because also Alabama's kind of been a weird RPI darling this year. I think they're sitting at 8.
Yep.
They absolutely can, and we've seen that exact path before, where team wakes up from a coma just in the nick of time and gets hot and ends up hosting a regional. And it feels very similar to last year, where like I went to that Clemson Super Regional with Florida and Clemson, and as good as Clemson was all year, with Florida coming in there, I was like, I just have a hard time seeing many teams beating Florida right now. And lo and behold, they got it done. So this just feels very familiar from what we saw from Florida last year.
And Alabama's top 8 chances, if they were to win 2 out of 3 to get to 17 or sweep to get to 18?
Yeah, certainly if they get to 18, you feel really good. 17 is interesting because they're going to end up having a relatively borderline RPI. And I don't know that they're going to stack up well just with like the regional advisory committees, the eye test, all that stuff. I don't know that they're going to stack up very well if they're in a conversation with, let's say, Vanderbilt or, pick your team that we talked about that's sitting on 16 wins. I just don't think that they're going to end up stacking up as well in the eye test as those other teams.
Georgia's on 16 right now. They host Texas A&M. You want to take a guess as to how that series is going to play out?
Pass. I don't know, man. Like A&M, this is going to go down no matter how it ends. Like this is going to go down as one of the weirdest seasons I've ever seen as someone who's covering college baseball. Like in any given weekend, A&M might be one of the 5 best teams to field that weekend, or they might look like absolute garbage against the worst team in the SEC that didn't have a win. It's just like, okay, anything's on the table. I will say, to give you some actual information, like I'm kind of interested in how the committee treats Georgia because their RPI has been kind of stuck at number 1 for a while. Now they've occasionally fallen to 2 when Texas was number 1, but for the most part, they've been number 1 in RPI all season. And so let's say they win 2 out of 3, they're sitting on 18. So that's their top 8 seed, whatever. Is the committee going to say, look, it's the number 1 RPI team, so they should be the number 1 overall or number 2 overall or something like that? Or will they kind of look at, hey, this team is flawed and they're a very good team, but they're no better than these other 5 SEC teams, and they make them the number 6 or 7 overall seed? That's going to be fascinating to me just as an RPI like litmus test, if you will.
Does A&M need to get 3, or is 2 enough to go to Hoover with a real shot?
I think because of the way the SEC is stacked, where we're once again just probably going to have a bunch of teams sitting at 13 or maybe 14, it feels like a pecking order problem where it's like if they have 12 and let's say they go 1-1 in Hoover or whatever, like is the committee going to look at that and say, are they really deserving a 14th team in the field if this team is 12-18 and had a relatively meaningless win in Hoover? Like, I would be nervous if I was A&M. They get to 13, we're probably not even worried about it. But here's the other thing is, like, they do have an RPI problem now. Like, they need to improve in that. And if you're sitting at, certainly if you're sitting at 12, but even at 13, if it's 13 and your RPI is in the mid to high 40s, that might be enough reason for the committee to say, look, I get that you have some high-end series wins, but you didn't do near enough with the opportunities you had. And honestly, I think that would be fair.
Been swept 4 times. That's hard to overlook at this point.
Yeah.
Last one is LSU in South Carolina. Is there a cause for concern you can conjure up for LSU this weekend?
Not really, unless we're looking at like a Mizzou A&M last weekend kind of thing. Although, even that, because it's on the road, not at home. So no, but I do think there might be a little bit of a weird air about the stadium in Founders Park, because ultimately the future of Paul Mainieri has overshadowed anything that's going to happen on the field this weekend. Just to kind of will he step away? Will he be around for a second year? He keeps giving interviews and talking to the media about, I was just kind of taken aback by how good the SEC is. I forgot how hard it is to win games. It doesn't sound like a coach that's really kind of steadying himself and steeling himself for year two. So I do think there could be just a strange atmosphere in the stadium this weekend that could make for some wacky results. But no, barring something unforeseen, I think LSU is fine. Just if you play your B or C game, you'll probably be okay.
That's kind of what the feeling has been. Enjoy the baseball, Joe, and we'll talk to you from Hoover next week.
All right, Hunt, see you, buddy.
Joe Healy, D1 Baseball SEC Extra Team. Check out Highway to Hoover podcast. Appointment listing for me, and this time of year probably should be for you as well. It's there's only one SEC series that I'm not super fascinated by, and I guess I can come up with a reason to be. It's Mississippi State, Missouri. It's the one we didn't touch on there. Mississippi State probably needs to win 2 games against Missouri to get in the NCAA tournament. So there's literally something on the table in every single matchup, which is incredible at this time of year. So thanks to Joe for giving us a little bit of time. We'll come back and close out hour number 1 coming up next.
The Hunt Palmer Show. You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Sagrera Farms.
Thursday shows brought to you by Sagrera Farms. Premium beef, ribeyes, fillets, flanks, ground beef, whole cows and sides. Put them in your freezer, courtesy of the folks at Sagrera Farms Premium Beef. Some of the best beef in the world. Been telling you about it for a few weeks now. Check them out at Sagrera Farms. I wrote a story earlier today for LouisianaSports.net that all stemmed from the interview that Paul Mainieri did with Matt yesterday on After Further Review. And I won't care about this talking point tomorrow or Monday at all, so we won't do it. But the former coach of this program is leading another program, and LSU's going to play him tonight. And I think that's newsworthy. I think that's noteworthy. And Paul Mainieri, if you ask 10 LSU fans about Paul Mainieri's tenure here, I think you'll get 6 or 7 very different answers. I think there are some that would suggest he did a great job. I think there are some that would suggest they never really liked him. I think there are some that would suggest that he took his foot off the gas. I think there are some that suggest he didn't win enough in the postseason or choked against some of the teams that were lesser than LSU, the Coastals and the Houstons and the Stony Brooks. And I think there are some that would say it was awesome, and then at the end it just kind of tailed off. I think the run that he went on from 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So that's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. 6 years in a row, Paul Mainieri had LSU as a national seed. That is not easy to do. It is not. Look at what the last 4 national champs have done in this sport. Mississippi State fell off a cliff. Ole Miss fell off a cliff. LSU almost drowned and then came back to life and lost in a regional. And then this year, Tennessee can't find itself. They've lost 5 out of 6 weekends. And he put over 56 games plus the SEC tournament, a phenomenal product on the field every single year for 6 years. And that's after he went to Omaha in 2008 and won a national championship in 2009. I think a lot of people around here are spoiled, and I'm glad they're spoiled because it means that we care a lot and we understand the game, and it's just a big deal to talk about college baseball this time of year in this town. And so to expect to win more than one national championship from 2007 through 2021 is a little bit irrational, but part of the reason that makes LSU baseball great. But I will always think of Paul Mainieri as a guy who took over a program that had cratered. Those last couple of smoke teams were awful. And he ignited the flame. And yeah, he got Lewis Coleman from a smoke team. And yeah, Blake Dean and Sean Achinko and some of those guys were recruited by Smoke. But he he got it to a point. They had one slight dip in 2011, and then they were great for the better than half a decade. And I wish things would have gone differently in the UCLA game in 2013. I was there for that. I wish it would have gone differently in the championship series in 2017. And yes, towards the end, those teams weren't quite as talented as you needed to be. But I think Paul Mainieri should be remembered around here incredibly fondly. His era was incredibly successful. And I'm grateful for everything that he did in Baton Rouge. I don't know how it's going to work out in South Carolina. I don't think that I have very high hopes for it. Hopefully the next 3 days don't go very well. But when he comes back to Baton Rouge, which he is, he said that on Matt's show yesterday, he should be celebrated for the rest of his days. I thought he did a great job here. And I appreciate that. Now, let's lace him up and go beat him for 3 days. That's it for hour number 1. See you after SportsCenter.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
HighlandIG.com. It's the Highland Insurance Group. Jonathan Carbo and his team, phenomenal folks to work with on the insurance side of things. I've had some conversations with Jonathan and his team. I won't elaborate too much on them because it's insurance talk and you really don't want to hear that. But you do understand that it's important at times. And they are experts technically in the insurance game. They are not folks that are going to cold call you up, say, hey, I can cut 20% off. Give me a chance here. That's not how they do business because that's not realistic in this marketplace. What is realistic is making sure that your policy reads properly so that when you've got a loss, whether it is a hurricane, whether it's a car accident, a workers' comp situation, a cyber attack, an employment practice liability issue, when that arises, instead of it being crippling to your business, the insurance policy kicks in and mitigates that loss. That's the most important part of insurance, and they can help you out with that. It's the Highland Insurance Group. You can find them online at highlandig.com.